Now, more stories, insights, and analysis of Illinois policy and politics. This is Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Once again, your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back on this special edition of Illinois Rising with House Speaker Mike Madigan's longtime spokesman, Steve Brown, who joins us from scenic Washington, Illinois. Drove up from central Illinois. We appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So I wanted to pick up on the discussion we were having about K through 12 education, because we have to talk about the funding side of it too, and not just the per pupil spending, but where that money comes from. And for most districts in the state, it comes from local property taxes. And with property tax increases in Chicago in the last year by Tiny Dancer, and property taxes ever spiraling, generally speaking, we have the highest, Illinoisans pay the highest property taxes in the nation. And I wonder, I've heard you talk previously about the idea that the state should be picking up more of the burden so that property tax relief can be provided. What do you say, and what is the Speaker's idea with respect to property tax relief that actually does relieve Illinois families of the overwhelming burden they shoulder?
For a number of years, there was the idea, and you mentioned former Senator Meeks earlier. He was probably the last really strong advocate of the so-called swap that said, well, we're going to cut the local taxes, local property taxes, replace it with state income tax dollars, basically. I'm not sure on final review that anybody could ever actually make that work, and you could put in the controls that kept the local taxes low. And so people have kind of walked away from that idea. Do you give some thought to a local government or a local school, say income tax surcharge, and then replace it that way? Is income a better way to measure a citizen's ability to pay for government services and goods than property? I mean, that was how that all really got going, that they sensed that if you had property, that meant you had means, you had some ability to pay. I'm not sure that's the case anymore.
Well, yeah, right. Go down to South Suburban Cook County.
Right.
Somebody's got a home in Flossmoor that's worth $150,000 today, and they pay $15,000 in property taxes. I mean, you have tens of thousands of families, hundreds of thousands of families that are going to end up, if they stay in Illinois, and many are not, they're going to pay for their house at least another half to full time, in addition to paying for it, almost twice with a 30-year fixed mortgage. They're going to pay for it another half to full time on property taxes alone. Right. Property tax bills that exceed your monthly mortgage payment. That is not exactly an example of a healthy economy or sensible public policy, is it? Where your property tax bill would exceed your monthly mortgage? Well,
that's why I'd say this is property anymore a reasonable barometer of your ability to pay for goods and services? And so do you need to look at go a different direction in that area?
Well, maybe rather than this kind of Byzantine formula, by which property is assessed in all 101 counties and Cook County, of course, differently. Maybe we should take it away from the mystics and just have a straight market-based valuation. And like other states do, California, for example, not exactly a bastion of conservatism, you only see a property tax increase when you either improve the property or sell it. And that's a way to truly have property tax caps and keep your property taxes low, so that the largest investment that most people make in their lives is an investment that generates a real return. Okay. Is that fair?
Seems like an interesting idea. I'm not sure all the details of how California works. I think, but they certainly have as many spending issues as Illinois has.
Right, but other states too, Iowa, Indiana, Michigan, also have a market-based full valuation at the outset, and something very similar. And Indiana has moved to largely state funding of education that way. Mm-hmm. But we have in Florida, again, it's like one of these things, it seems in Illinois, we never pick our heads up and look around at the other incubators or laboratories of democracy for ideas that maybe we can incorporate here. I know Ed Burke does whatever New York has introduced last, but maybe we should broaden our horizon a little bit. So, for example, with respect to the whole funding of schools, Florida doesn't have an income tax, and it has very low property taxes. And their schools are open. I would say in their major urban centers, they're performing at least as well, if not better, than Chicago. So maybe it's not just all the funding level and the taxation level. Maybe it's about how the money flows and who gets to make spending decisions. Maybe that's what needs to change.
It all ought to be examined. And I think that examination goes on. Do you always get the result you hope for? Probably not. I mean, you've been around this a long time. You know how many different school reform ideas have passed. The last one was let's make it harder to strike. Then we had one created, local school councils, numerous testing alternatives. So it sounds good to talk about let's change the way the money's distributed, who makes the spending decisions. How do you come together and cause that to happen?
Well, this is a political will problem. And again, your boss has been around for 30 years, and you've seen all these ideas play out in all these other states. Mm-hmm. So if you were just saying, well, we're going to incorporate best practices from other states, it seems like he's ideally suited, given his position of political strength, to drive that train if he wanted to drive it. And I haven't heard him drive a train on completely rethinking K through 12 in terms of the quality of the schools, in terms of the underlying funding, in forever.
Well, I think there's been those discussions. The question is, can you produce a conclusion that has enough support?
Well, if he's unable to produce a conclusion that has support and positive impact after 3 decades, then should he be replaced with somebody who can?
If you would tell me who that person would be and what that replacement would accomplish.
So you're open to it?
I'm always open to listening.
Oh, okay. Well,
okay. I listen to your show, so I'm open to just about anything.
I appreciate
but
that.
But that's part of the sort of the ruse that goes on with all of these different ideas for term limits or the remap change, things like that. They never tell you what their vision is for whatever the entity is once all that change occurs.
I mean, I'll pull an actuary out of Deloitte and replace Madigan with that person. Mm-hmm. Just somebody that can, kind of operate a balance sheet.
Okay.
How about that? I mean, in a state of 13 million people, there's nobody else who could do a job as good as Madigan has done over the last 3 decades, or many of the other legislators for that matter. I think there are hundreds of thousands of people that could do a better job. I think you could, throw a dart at a page in the phone book if those things still existed and find people that are better than any number of members of the General Assembly. I mean, my point is, this is the worst governed state in the nation by every measure, 30 years into his reign, and we're pretending like, hey, we're trying to figure it out. We're looking at ideas. We're listening to people. We're commissioning task forces. And meanwhile, people are leaving this state like the Israelites fled Egypt.
I'm not sure it's all that bad when you get into someday somebody will get into the real background behind the migration issues. They've not really done it yet.
Why are we losing congressional districts every census if we're not losing population?
Because the population in other states is growing faster than we're gaining. We have lost some population. I don't think the migration, though, is due to the government services as much as people would like us to believe.
So you don't think people are leaving, and you have people that still maintain a residence here but are actually official residents of other states, people with means. You think that's just kind of fictional? We don't have a problem?
I'm not sure it's a dramatic problem.
And so the Illinois Policy Institute, and source, has estimated that we've lost one person every 15 minutes, or 10 minutes, for the last 15 years, which is about $25 billion in gross domestic product. Do you dispute those numbers?
I don't have anything to compare them with, so I really don't know. And again, the important thing is to try to figure out the why and what part of it is due to the quality of government service versus your grandchildren are living somewhere, you're retiring, you want to be in a warmer climate. And nobody's ever done that kind of really qualitative analysis of the why part of it.
Well, what about business climate? Do you think businesses and businesses that are here, as well as businesses that are looking at a place to invest, to locate a new facility, do you think that they look at tax and regulatory policy as well as just kind of overall financial solvency of a state, and that impacts their decision?
I don't think it's the top thing they look at. I think a lot of them look at the availability, dependability of utilities, where you are geographically in the country, what the transportation network is like. And so as a result, you see companies coming here. You see announcements. I think on a weekly basis, it seems like you're seeing some new corporate headquarters coming to Chicago, relocating from the suburbs to Chicago. Is it perfect here? Absolutely not. But is it as awful as somebody? Dan, I think, I spent the last week downtown, which was nice.
Yeah.
And there's probably 20, maybe 30 cranes, a lot of big buildings being built. And I think if those people thought things were as bad as some want to portray, those things wouldn't be happening.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, one, why do we have an unemployment rate 25% higher than the national average then if everybody's moving here?
I didn't say everybody was moving here. I'm saying there is prosperity here. I'm saying there's appearance, at least to me. You go into the center part of the city and you see that many high-rise projects going on. Things can't really be that bad.
Yeah, it's a Potemkin village, though. I live down in that center of the city,
okay.
so it is very nice. And Chicago's a beautiful city. If it would be much more beautiful and probably more robust and a lot safer if we had a different political class there than we've had for the past 100 years. But it is worth pointing out that Brooklyn. There's a story in the New York Post this week. Brooklyn is to pass Chicago, third largest city in the country by 2020. And you know what the secret in Brooklyn is? They have 73 murders this year so far to Chicago's 426. Right. And not to mention New York public schools, not necessarily a model, but they're exponentially better, thanks in part to Giuliani and Bloomberg's reform measures, than Chicago public schools in providing opportunities for children to earn a quality education. And so it turns out those things kind of matter. I mean, Chicago, you look at the city center, you look at the 3 wards or 4 wards that throw off most of the income that, yes, you have tech people and so forth and young people that want to move and live in the city because it's beautiful and you got the lake and you have all the amenities and the culture, all of which I love. That's why I'm there. Okay. And then you get outside that perimeter and you have people being shot and killed every day. You have unemployment rate that is a multiple of the Illinois state unemployment rate. And you have a city that's bankrupt with the Chicago public school system that is junk rated, junk in, junk out. So, yeah, I think it is that bad. And the evidence of it is Brooklyn is going to surpass Chicago and Houston's going to surpass Chicago. And the business climate in these other states, based on who's moving there and what they're throwing off, seems to be significantly more robust since Illinois is in the bottom 5 in job creation for the last 5 years running.
And yet that perimeter you mentioned is grown by blocks and blocks and blocks over the last, 10, 15 years? All that West Loop, South Loop, that's
yeah, I understand.
You have to. Steve, Dan, I think you have to acknowledge.
I live there. I acknowledge it. I've seen what's happened to the city since I've lived there for the last 15 years. But that's 250,000 people in a city of 2.7 million. Okay. So
it's not. I don't think it's as desperate, or it's not It's a non-prosperous place. I think things can be better. Sure,
it's prosperous for a small fraction of the population.
I don't know that that's the case. You see,
you
see thousands of people coming and going to work every day. So I don't think it's a small fraction of the population. Can conditions improve? Should we try to get a handle on it? I'm not sure exactly the way on the crime and the violence in Chicago. Yes, but I don't think the constant drumbeat that says, "Oh, this is an awful place," everybody's leaving, really tells the whole story.
No, I'm not saying it's an awful place. I'm saying that the people in charge of city and state government are awful. There's a difference between those two statements.
Well, there's been a variety of people over time, so a lot of partners. So
I agree.
So we would need.
But I'm just talking about the current crop. But I agree.
I talk about the crop that put it all in place, and they go back a number of years.
Yeah, I know, like Mike Madigan, who's been there 30.
Well, let's go back to Jim Thompson, Jim Edgar, George Ryan.
Let's.
Okay.
I agree.
Right.
I'm in vociferous agreement.
And so why? How could it possibly be that these things are so awful, and you have all these ideas, we can't get somebody to come in and make it all better?
Because, it's
amazing.
It's not a white knight. It's people that have bought into a government-centric view of society, including those Republican governors that you mentioned. They have absolutely been part and parcel of the problem. They were terrible governors, every single one of them. And they facilitated what Madigan has exponentially increased as House Speaker and the most powerful man in the state.
I think you give him a little too much credit.
No.
But maybe he had a good PR guy that helped build that image.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, right.
So we'll come back. And then we'll try to find these people that can come in, win election, and then work with 118 others.
Well, win election, right? I mean, because we're
going to abolish the elected form of government?
No.
Oh, okay.
You just, but to win election here, I mean, especially on your side of the aisle, you just have to, be a wholly owned subsidiary of the public sector unions. That's how you win election. But the problem is then you're beholden to those people that financed you, especially with those people.
Just get up and say, no, I'm not going to do that.
Well, I understand. I agree that we need to find a wider array of talent to run for legislative office and statewide offices for that matter, and that we need to switch out some of the personnel. But it's not just a personnel problem. It's a political culture problem. It's a kleptocratic political culture, rent seekers. It doesn't matter what you do. It matters how much political clout you have. No, it doesn't matter the quality of the good or service you provide. It matters, if you can get a meeting with Ed Burke or Tiny Dancer or Mike Madigan or John Cullerton, you meet him over at Tavern on Rush. That's what matters. Well, that's a terrible way to do government in a free society, and we're a terrible government in a free society.
If that was really the way it was happening, Dan, I think I would agree with you. I don't think that's the way it happens. I think an awful lot of people who come to the government at whatever level with issues, with problems, aren't the wealthy, aren't heavily lobbied up, get pretty good satisfaction.
Well, like the 24,000 families with a family member who has developmental disability waiting in line for services that we guarantee them.
Proft?